I was 16. Don't even remember what month it was, but I know this was sometime during the summer. My parents were gone for the weekend, so I was spending the 2 days alone doing whatever. Mostly cycling between watching YouTube, gaming, and grabbing snacks from the kitchen. So I was in my room upstairs 99% of the time, with headphones on. I think being a teen, it was nice to just sit in my room and do whatever I wanted without being bothered. At some point while I was gaming though, I started hearing voices. At first, I thought a video had started playing in the background, but when I checked YouTube, everything was paused. So then I took my headphones off, and that's when I noticed the voices were coming from outside. I had my bedroom window slightly cracked open, so I could hear just the muffled sound of someone speaking. It was raining outside too, which made it more difficult. They had to be close though, like near the outside walls of the house. Couldn't tell what they were saying, or if they were talking to someone else. I only heard what sounded like one voice. By the time I had gotten up from my chair and walked over to the window to get a closer listen, they had stopped talking. I decided to head downstairs and try looking out some of the other windows to see if they were still around, because honestly, someone walking that close to the house at 8 p.m. was pretty weird. Seemed like whoever it was gone already though, because I couldn't see any sign of them when I got downstairs. I took the opportunity to grab a bag of chips from the kitchen, then headed back up to my room. Must have been up there gaming for an hour, but it went by really fast. I was in the middle of a round, and suddenly heard a voice from outside my headset. Even mid-game and with the headphones on, the voice was much more clear than what I was hearing earlier. Not necessarily louder, but far less muffled, and I could have sworn I knew what he said. I quickly took off my headset and listened. The house was quiet and creaky as I waited for 15 seconds before I heard the voice again.
Luke!
The man called my nickname. My full name was Lucas, but I always went by Luke with my buddies, and that's what he was calling out. I didn't recognize this man's voice though, and more importantly, I was almost positive his voice was coming from below me. Like inside the house below me. I quietly laid my headset on the desk, got up and walked up to the bedroom door. I did my best to open it very quietly, not to let it creak or make any noise. Just when I opened it, he yelled my name again. Though yelled isn't the right word. He was calling it out, but almost softly. It was like when you call out someone's name just to ask them something. Very calm and friendly. In the context of whoever this man was breaking into my home, it only added to how disturbing the whole thing was. His voice had this gravelly sound to it. Sounded like he had to be mid-50s with a life full of smoking. As he said my name again, I was able to confirm that he was definitely inside the house, and probably right around the bottom of the staircase. I backed up and left the door open, scared to close it and make noise, with him being so close. I then went to the back window and pushed it further open, then carefully stepped out onto the roof and closed it as much as I could without letting it latch shut. It wasn't a full roof. It was actually the overhang to the front porch, and it just happened to be right outside my window, making a kind of 3 or 4 foot wide sloped ledge that I could stand or sit on. Definitely not the safest, especially being wet and slippery from the rain, but I didn't have much of a choice, unless I wanted to hide in the bedroom and probably get found before cops could make it. And that's when I realized I f***ed up. I left my phone on my desk. I was too worried about getting out to even think about it. I moved back toward the window and prepared to go back in and get it. But just as I peered into the room, I saw a shadow through the doorway coming down the hall outside my room. I quickly moved back out of sight. My heart was pounding. Few seconds later, I heard some things shuffling around in my room, and then the man call my name again.
Luke.
That creepy, soft tone. I peered over just a little bit so I could partially see the room. All I saw was his shadow on the wall, moving around and looking at my desk, probably seeing I had a game opened, and was in the process of figuring out I had to be somewhere nearby still. I really wanted to look around a little further to get a glimpse of who he was, but I couldn't risk getting caught. I started getting that sixth sense gut feeling that I was about to be found out, so I acted fast, moving to the farthest point of the ledge. Under me was nothing but a small bush and some grass. It was maybe an 8 to 10 foot drop. I sort of dangled off first, then let go, hitting my legs on the ground and falling back. It was painful, but didn't break anything. I got up and ran for the nearest neighbor. Honestly, I don't know how others in these stories I listen to do it, because in my case, I couldn't get anyone to answer the door and help me. I mean, it was the middle of the night, and they probably thought I was some lunatic trying to get them to open the door and let me in. It still ended up working though, because one of the houses called the police on me for banging on their door, which I was then able to explain to the officer my situation. I had no way to know how long I was out there for. My guess is 20 minutes before the cop came by. The man in my home was gone, but the officer also found the window in my room fully open. The guy had checked out on the ledge at some point after I left. It made my heart sink, knowing how close I was. In the following days, my legs swelled up from the jump, but ultimately had no lasting injuries. Crazy to think that decision actually might have saved my life, or prevented whatever sick plans that intruder had in mind. I think it'll always haunt the back of my mind though, knowing I was so close to seeing who the man was, and yet I didn't. Kinda wish I risked it and looked. But it's easy for me to say now, while I'm not actively in a life-threatening situation. As far as me and my family are aware, the guy never came back and never followed up on anything. I'm much older now, so I don't think anything will ever come from it, and hopefully it stays that way. I work as security for a small office space in town. Even after this happened, I still decided to keep the job, as I couldn't find anything else with better pay. Trust me, I'll be leaving as soon as I can though. Part of the reason I got the job, and I didn't mind it, was that the office space was part of a large business district, or office park, that was in the middle of a fairly wealthy part of town. Really, I couldn't see any way people would actually try breaking into one of these places, as they had to know in a wealthier area like this, there would be security, if not in person, at least through cameras and monitoring systems. Anyway, I clocked in at 10 p.m., doing my first quick rounds of the place to activate all the detection systems, then headed into the security office. It was more of a closet, to be honest. No windows or anything, so not a fun place to be. If I could help it, I like to walk around pretty often. I was only supposed to get up and walk around every hour, including a perimeter walk of the building. But I did it more frequently, because watching the cameras and systems and stuff was really a drag. However, this night, it was pouring down a little too hard to be walking around outside. So I was stuck inside, walking the hallways. One thing to mention is that the cameras always fogged up every time it rained, which made all the outdoor ones nearly useless. Just 30 minutes into my shift, there was an alert on the monitor. It detected motion from one of the cameras on the front of the building. I checked it and could barely see anything, though it did look like there might have been someone standing outside the front door. I could just see a little bit of movement. So I headed out of the office and down to the first story. All I was gonna do was go out there and see what the guy wanted, or if there even was a guy there. But when I opened the door and looked out, he wasn't there. Still just a rainy mess outside, and no one in sight. I closed the door and reset the alarm. Very strange for anyone to be out here tonight. Maybe he had the wrong building. Regardless, it looked like he left, so I tried not to bother with it. I went back up to the office. I was only sitting down for another 5-ish minutes before I heard a phone ringing. Not the security phone on my desk. It sounded like it was coming from a floor below, in one of the offices. Annoyed, I got up and walked down there, but by then it had already rung through. I waited a few minutes, and almost like I predicted it, they called again. I followed the sound into a seemingly typical office room. Bunch of desks lined up in rows, with the main overhead lights off. But right in the middle, there was a small glowing light from a phone on one of the desks. I walked up to it. It said unknown caller. I found it extremely odd that a random phone on one of the office desks was ringing. Why this specific one, and not the reception desk phone that was linked to the company? How did anyone even have the specific office phone number and extension? I wanted to answer and ask who was calling. I mean, the mystery of it was hard to ignore, but it wasn't my business to be answering random phone calls. Probably could have gotten in trouble for it if someone found out I did. So I left it. I didn't know how to put the thing on silent, so for the next hour, I'd constantly hear the damn thing ringing below me as I sat upstairs in the security room. At 1 a.m., I got up and did a quick walkthrough of the office, just the usual rounds. It only took 10 minutes, and then I was back at the security desk. But I didn't even get to sit down when I heard a thump resonate through the building. It echoed like it was from the hollow stairwell, or possibly a hallway. Scared the hell out of me. I checked the system and saw nothing interesting, so then I ran down to the first floor to recheck the doors that I'd just checked. I felt a bit of shock as I approached the front door and noticed a blinking green light on the alarm system. It was put on pause, basically disarming this specific door. Even I never did that. I only turned it on or off, never on pause. Feeling a bit of tension, I pushed open the door and looked outside. Still pouring, and still nobody out there. I closed and relocked the door. Something really strange was going on this night, and it was the first time since getting this gig that I'd actually been uneasy. I had no idea what was going on. I started to hurry back up the stairwell, hoping if I looked over the system again, it would give me some sort of answers. I got to the 3rd story when I stopped right on the stairs. The door was open, the one leading to the 3rd floor office hallway, which was also where the phone had been ringing from earlier. I carefully stepped up to it, not hearing a single thing, as I approached and looked out into the hallway. And then everything went black. My sight, hearing, probably whole consciousness just cut out for a split second. When I was back, I was completely dazed and in the middle of stumbling backward. And even though I blacked out for a moment, I knew instantly that I'd been hit in the back of the head. As my whole body was fighting to stay awake, I fell down a few steps in the stairwell and saw the blurry outline of someone standing in the doorway. I immediately got to my feet and stumbled down the rest of the steps, ears ringing and head throbbing as I managed to make it out of the building. I used the work phone on my belt to quick dial 911. I hid behind my car in the downpour as I waited for them to get there. I was so out of it, I couldn't tell you how long I waited for. They didn't find anyone in the building. I was taken to the hospital and treated for a pretty bad concussion, but was otherwise okay. While it might seem like just a regular break-in, a lot of things added up to make it feel more, professional, I guess. They did it on a rainy night when the camera lenses were fogged over, and assuming it was them calling, they knew a specific office worker's phone number that wasn't available to the public. And most convincing is they knew how that exact security system worked and how to disengage it so they could get in unnoticed. Seems too coincidental to be some nobody breaking in on a whim. The dude hit me so hard too, I couldn't even make out anything but a blurry image of him, so I had no description to give the police. All this being said, I know I won't be getting any answers. I've still been working there, months after this happened, and the company hasn't told me anything. Nothing about if anything was stolen, or if they knew who it was, or even what he broke in for. Nothing at all. It's really odd, and I'm still in the process of looking for a new gig. But until then, I'm gonna be way more aware of any strange things going on at this office. A few months ago, me and my buddy Thomas were hanging out at my place for the evening. Neither of us worked the next day, so we were just chilling and having some beers. Honestly, we weren't planning to hang out for that long, but by the time it was 10 p.m., I offered Thomas to sleep on the couch if he wanted, which was actually a pretty common occurrence. He still lived with his folks, so hanging at my place was his way of getting some space. Anyway, we made plans for tomorrow morning as well, and the whole thing turned into planning to have a pretty cool day tomorrow. But since Thomas didn't bring any extra clothes or anything, and before he drank too much, he drove back to his place real quick to grab some stuff. That way, we can drink some more when he got back, and he'd have stuff for tomorrow. Obviously, he could have stayed home since he was going back anyway, but like I said, he preferred hanging at my place. The drive was only 5 minutes, so I just hung back and waited. I was gonna stay out on the porch, but somehow I'd never noticed the massive storm going on outside, so I went back in and just waited on the couch. I was scrolling on my phone and sipping on my beer, not really watching the time, but at some point, say 15 or 20 minutes later, a knock finally came at the front door. I quickly got up and casually opened the door for him, but nearly dropped my glass when I was startled by it not being Thomas. It was just some guy, wearing almost all black and dripping wet. I swear the man looked so creepy. There was no chance in hell, even being drunk, that I would have ever opened the door for him. Normally, I would have checked first, too, if I hadn't been expecting Thomas. And with the crazy storm out, what was this guy even doing? Before I could get a word out, the man put one foot in the doorway and looked in at me. He'd clearly been out in the rain for hours, though he had a tired look masked over his whole face. I reached back for the door and said sorry, that I thought he was someone else. He kept his foot in the doorway, though, and just smiled. I started to close the door, and he still didn't get the hint, keeping his foot right there in the doorway. It was incredibly weird and also awkward, because for a good 4 or 5 seconds, we just stood there. He didn't say anything, and I was too drunk to think of anything to say. And then he finally moved his foot and took a step back, still smiling as I closed the door. Immediately I went back to the couch and sent Thomas a text to watch out for the creep lurking outside the door. Honestly, it was more of a joke text, though. After getting the door closed and everything, I thought it was so ridiculous that it was kind of funny. Maybe I had a few too many drinks. I waited a decent amount of time, definitely longer than it should have taken him to be back. I thought it could have been the storm making things take a while, but when I went up to the window and looked out to check on the storm, I saw Thomas's car was back, parked on the curb. Confused, I went to the front door and opened it, but Thomas wasn't there. I stood in the doorway, looking out into the rain for a minute, but it was clear Thomas wasn't around. His car was parked and off, and I didn't see any movement in there, so he definitely wasn't still sitting inside. I pulled my phone out and called his cell. Right away, a light lit up in his car. It was certainly his phone, and it lit up enough for me to see clearly that he was not inside. Now I was worried. I walked out into the rain to the bottom of the driveway and looked around. I called out his name, but it was so loud outside, I knew it was useless. Somehow, it wasn't until I got utterly soaked by the rain that I remembered the creepy man that was outside the house before. I started to think he might have had something to do with this. Getting a really overwhelming feeling about this whole thing, I ran back inside, closing and locking the door behind me. As I took my shoes off, I quickly felt that something else was wrong. I looked up, and the main hallway was dark. Like really dark, as if none of the lights were on back there. Could have sworn I'd left them all on, or at least a couple of lights. I slowly walked down to the end of the hallway. The storm going on outside the walls, along with the calm quietness of inside the house, was making it way more tense than I was comfortable with. I got to the end and looked around. All the rooms were dark, but right along the side of the wall, the faintest outline of someone was standing there, pressed up to the wall like they were trying to stay out of sight. I must have looked at them for a little too long though, because after a couple of seconds, the man moved with confidence and stepped toward me. He was holding one of his arms up and had something in his hand, and at the time I didn't look long enough to see what it was before running. I used every muscle in my body to run as fast as possible out the front door and as far away as I could. I hid in some random house's front porch and called the police. From there, I could sort of see through the rain to the front of my house. So a few minutes later, when cops showed up, I watched as two officers calmly walked up to the front door before suddenly raising their guns and sprinting inside. I guess they saw the guy still in the hallway and chased him out the back door, but they said he jumped the fence and they lost him in the storm. I ran over and told them everything, and they immediately started searching for Thomas, and thankfully found him after only 5 minutes. He was locked inside a car parked down the road, tied up in everything. Turned out the man creeping outside my house held Thomas at gunpoint as soon as he pulled up to the house. And then, after forcing him to get into the car down the road, he came back to the house and broke in through the back while I was looking for Thomas, presumably trying to do the same thing to me. Which means when I saw him holding his arm up, he was holding a gun pointed right at me. Had it not been too dark, and had I seen what it was, I probably wouldn't have even risked running away, which would have left both me and Thomas at the mercy of this insane man. Anyway, the car the guy was using was stolen earlier that night, so it was a dead end, and the guy was completely lost to the storm. No traces whatsoever. We have no clue what he intended, or why he did any of it. When I was in college, me and my best mate, who I'll call John for privacy, hung out pretty much every day. We were also roommates, so it was nice. Both of us together were definitely not the smartest though. Not in an intelligence kind of way, but in a make a lot of bad impulsive decisions kind of way. We always just got caught up doing something stupid. like checking out abandoned houses or doing whatever dangerous, often illegal stunts we could pull off, like climbing up water towers, for example. Just stupid crap like that. This night, we had the idea to do something arguably a lot less dangerous and crazy in comparison to our other adventures. We thought it'd be cool to check out the woods at the back of our town in the middle of the night. Maybe we'd get an adrenaline pump or something. Now, for reference, the woods surrounded every side of our small town, but the reason we wanted to check out the woods at the back of the town was because that's where nobody goes. Not most normal people, anyway. Even me and John had never been there before. A huge portion of the town on that side was abandoned due to a big fire from decades ago, and because there's nothing else over there, the woods on that side were kind of abandoned too. No trails or anything. We packed up some flashlights and headed out there. It was a 30-minute walk from the campus to the back of town, and 10 more minutes through the burnt sections to get to the forest. With the coast clear, we took out our flashlights and headed into the trees. Just a couple minutes in, the lights from the town were completely gone, and it was just the faint moonlight and our small flashlights to lead us through the woods. Honestly, it didn't feel all that special for the first 20 or so minutes. After the initial spooky feeling of entering a dark forest at night wore off, it was quiet, and there wasn't all that much to see. Just trees and more trees. No abandoned structures or weird signs of anything. That was until completely out of the blue, John noticed something in the distance. A light carving through the darkness between all the trees up ahead. It was for sure a flashlight. Not a flickering campfire or anything natural. And strangely, it was low, like on the ground. We walked up closer and closer, realizing that's exactly what it was. A flashlight, just left there sitting on the ground, with nobody nearby. Nothing else was there either, like any signs of a campsite. Considering it was a regular electric flashlight, someone had to have had hold of it recently, definitely that night. Otherwise, it would have run out of batteries by now. Neither of us could see how someone would forget a flashlight though, or drop it and not notice, because it was quite literally a light in an otherwise pitch black forest, which then led us to conclude someone likely dropped it while running. And if they didn't come back to pick it up, they must have been running from something. I felt a chill run through me, which should have been our sign to get out of there. But that little bit of adrenaline creeping into our veins as we shined our lights around was kind of what we were looking for. We decided it would be best just to leave the light though, just in case it wasn't what we thought it was, and someone was gonna come back for it. I led the way deeper into the woods, while John followed close behind. Both of us now wanted to see what else we could find out there, sort of hoping to piece together the full story behind that really odd find. Not even 2 minutes after leaving the area the light was in, there was a sudden crack behind us. It was several, like 3 or 4 sticks cracking in succession, somewhere just 20 or 30 feet behind where John was standing. We both whipped around and looked, but saw nothing. Definitely kept our nerves up though. We walked another 5 minutes before suddenly hearing that same sort of sound, again from just behind John. I swore it sounded like someone quickly running along the forest floor, but again, we saw nothing at all. However, after that second time, both of us were seriously creeped out, more than the typical exciting adrenaline rush we were hoping for. This was actual fear, like we were in real danger this time. It's crazy, because we both thought this was so much less of a stunt compared to our usual stuff. I mean, what were the chances of actually running into someone in the woods in the middle of the night, especially in this part of the woods? We still didn't have 100% certainty that it was a person that we kept hearing, but it damn well sounded like it. It must have happened 5 or 6 times before we heard it again and turned around, and just slightly saw a shadow move out of the light and behind a tree. John must have seen it too, because we both froze up and stood there, staring behind us for a lot longer than we did all the other times. And just 10 seconds later, we saw a figure move his head, slightly peering around the tree at us. We both immediately booked it, running to the side and then turning back the way we came from. I'd say we sprinted through the trees for 5 minutes straight, before slowing down to catch our breaths. We then walked with our flashlights on the dim setting, all the way back to town. Oddly, we both realized we never saw the flashlight on our way back. Someone, maybe that guy, must have picked it up and turned it off. We walked back to campus and just couldn't believe what happened. Who was stalking us out in the backwoods at night? Just didn't make any sense. Now, neither of us can confirm this had anything to do with what we experienced, but a few days later, the town got word of a missing person last seen heading toward the back of town. There's no saying if they went missing back there, or in the woods, or if they possibly had something happen related to what we experienced. I guess it's just the thought of what we might have stumbled upon in those woods that I find so disturbing. Had we let the strange man continue stalking us, or had we continued even deeper into the forest, I don't know what we would have found, or if we would have made it back. A few years ago, I moved from the far west coast, about 1,000 miles inland. The drive was through the northern part of the US, so not your main highways that everyone takes through the country. These were much less used, and unless you're going to all the main cities, to get where you're going, you probably have to take several side roads. It was a scenic drive at least, but after making it back and forth multiple times, its effect sort of wore off. This was on my last time making the drive, with the final leftovers from the move stuffed away in my trunk. I did a whole day of driving, making it to a small town and taking a nap around 6 p.m. I woke up at 9 p.m. and continued on the road. However, I made it just an hour out of town when my car started acting up. A bunch of maintenance lights turned on, and the whole steering system felt off. It only got worse over the next 5 minutes, so bad I knew I couldn't drive it. I pulled off the road and onto the gravel shoulder. Almost felt like some stupid joke that this had to happen as far as possible in between towns. From having taken this drive several times before, I knew there weren't any towns for an hour in each direction. No service out there either. Just woods in all directions, and not a soul on the road. I slumped back in my seat and just took a moment, then got out and looked around my car. I knew absolutely nothing about cars, but I don't know, I guess I was hoping there was something obviously wrong. However, there wasn't. The piece of junk probably just ran its course. Have to say, once I was outside for a couple minutes, I started to notice this road was creepy as hell. Dim, spread out streetlights, and trees going out what seemed like infinitely. It was also dead silent. Ironically, I actually remember thinking that it felt like I was in a horror movie. But anyway, I understood that my only chance here was to get someone to stop and help, whether that was giving me a lift to the next gas station, or whatever. So I stood out there, leaning up against my car, and waited for someone to pass by. It surprised me that after 15 minutes, not only did a car come down the road, but they also stopped for me. He pulled up right next to me and rolled down his window. The guy looked mid-30s, smoking a cig and sort of inspecting me for a couple seconds, before asking if I was okay. To be fair, it made sense for him to be skeptical of picking up some random person on the side of the road. I told him about my car situation. He took another few seconds to think. As he did, he kept checking his mirrors, and maybe it was just a gut feeling of mine, but something felt real off about this guy. This wasn't exactly the time to be picky about who helps me, but all the alarms in my head were going off to not get in the car with him.
Well, why don't you hop in? I'll give you a lift to the next town. I wouldn't mind helping a folk out tonight.
I paused for a second, not sure how to reject his offer.
I've actually got a buddy on his way. Should be just a few minutes out. Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
The guy nodded and gave a not-so-friendly smirk, then quickly pulled away and vanished down the road. That reaction was all I needed to know I made the right decision. However, that was the last car to come by for the entire hour, maybe longer. I didn't think I was on that desolate of a road, but I guess I was, and it being the middle of the night didn't help. I was practically falling asleep against the side of my car when headlights came down the road, this time from the direction I was headed in. I waved to get their attention, and they slowed and pulled up to me. Oddly, the car looked familiar, like the same one that had stopped by an hour ago, although I didn't really look at it too hard, so it could have been just any other dark black sedan. They all looked the same to me anyway. Plus, when they rolled down their window, it was a woman driving. She looked like maybe late 20s. Right away, she asked if I needed help, though it felt strange. She had a nervous smile, like she almost didn't want to be offering help. I told her I just needed a ride to anywhere. Gas station, town, whatever. She nodded and unlocked the passenger door. I wasn't about to pass up another offer, so I got in. Right away, the vibes felt off, in a disturbing way. She didn't say anything and just stared forward at the road with wide eyes.
Thank you for picking me up. I don't know what I'd do if you didn't.
I said, trying to make conversation. She never even asked what happened to my car or why I was stranded. She didn't respond either, still staring forward at the road. Something was really strange about her, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. So I sat back and tried to rest a little while we drove down the road in silence. This went on for around 20 minutes, when I noticed a sign for a gas station 2 miles ahead. I felt relieved and let her know she could drop me off when we got there. She didn't look at me, just doing a short nod and keeping a straight face. Now that we were getting close, though, I figured I'd ask her if everything was okay. The woman glanced at me, then back forward. Her eyes, they looked almost like she was scared. It sort of freaked me out. And just then, I saw something move in the corner of my eye. I looked and saw the mirror. Whatever I saw move had been in the rear view mirror. So naturally, I looked back. My heart instantly dropped. The back seat was dark, and a figure was sitting right behind my seat, sort of hunched over like he was keeping out of view. As soon as I looked at him, though, he sat up straight, and I could just make out that it was the same guy that stopped on the road earlier, the one I refused a ride from. And he looked furious. I quickly looked forward and saw the gas station up ahead, telling the woman to pull in and drop me off immediately. But she wasn't slowing down. She was going to pass it. And that's when I realized what was going on. This woman was a victim too, probably being forced by the man in the back seat to pick me up from the road and keep driving to wherever the hell he wanted to take us. I started trying to convince her to turn off at the gas station, but the man yelled over me, threatening me to shut up and telling her to keep driving. We approached the turnoff, still going at least 50, but completely catching me off guard. She suddenly and sharply turned in, slamming on the brakes just before hitting the gas pumps. Instantly, she bailed from the vehicle, which was my cue to go as well. Both of us bolted for the gas station doors. When we got in, she told the night clerk to call the cops, while I watched as the man got in the front seat and sped away. Long story short, it was exactly what I thought had happened. Both me and the woman were victims of that creepy guy, presumably kidnapping us. Honestly, I'm really thankful she had the courage to go against the man's threats and pull into the gas station anyway. She could have very easily done what the guy said and kept driving, and I don't know what would have happened then. Thankfully, I don't have to know. I work at a small 24/7 diner off the side of the highway. Nothing glamorous at all. The owner was my good friend, and I needed something just to help me get by for a while. It also was way better than working at a regular diner, because this place was never busy. At least, not all at once. It was just a pull-off from the highway, where usually truckers or people on road trips would stop by to grab a coffee or a quick meal before hitting the road again, which made for interesting customers too. But because I worked overnights, it was usually real quiet, and this night was no exception. Only 2 or 3 customers stopped by for a quick cup of joe, then left to hit the road again. Afterward, there was a whole hour of nothing. I just sat by the windows and looked out at the empty highway, thinking about whatever. Eventually, I think around 1 a.m., a truck pulled into the parking lot, so I went around the counter and greeted the 2 men as they walked in. Both of them looked beat from a long drive and ordered the same as everyone else that night, 2 regular black coffees to go. After ordering, one went to the restroom and the other sat at the bar while I made their drinks.
Hey, I got a weird question. You aren't alone here, are you?
That question immediately made me hesitate for a second. I couldn't tell what he was trying to get at. I decided to just be truthful though, as he didn't seem to have any alternative intention.
Yeah, just me for tonight. It's been slow, so I don't mind it.
He looked almost confused for a second, like he didn't expect that answer, or was maybe hoping that wasn't my answer.
Well, just be careful. Saw some guy at the side of the building as we drove in. Looks like he was up to no good, but I don't know. I thought he might have worked here. That's why I asked.
I thanked him for letting me know, and by then the other guy came out of the restroom. I gave them both their coffees, and they headed out, pulling back onto the highway. After they left, I went back up to the window and looked out at both sides of the parking area, but it was all empty. Also, I had been watching outside all night. I would have seen if someone else had come into the parking lot, and we only had parking in the front, so their car would be out there. The guy didn't feel like he was lying though, and after a minute, curiosity got the better of me. I went outside and looked around the building. Didn't see anyone, so I walked around the entire place. There was nothing. It did feel a little bit creepy out there, with the dark woods surrounding the building, so I didn't test my luck. I went back inside. Surely the trucker just thought he saw something that wasn't actually there. I mean, he did look tired, and obviously he meant no harm by it. I kept my eyes open from that point forward though. The diner stayed dead. No customers, and really not many cars passing by on the highway either. Made for a real slow night. I did some of the dishes and swept up around the floor, then took a break and went to the restroom for a minute. I was on my phone, so I was definitely taking my time, but at some point while I was in there, I heard a door open. I quickly finished up and headed back to the floor.
Welcome in.
I said in my typical enthusiastic customer service voice as I walked out to the diner, but immediately stopped in my tracks when I looked up. Nobody was at any of the seats. After a second, I nervously walked around the floor, but still, there was nobody inside. I knew without a doubt I'd heard the door open. Obviously, it was a sound I was very familiar with. I went over and pushed it open, looking around outside as well. No cars. I tested the door a couple of times, and it definitely wasn't flimsy, like it wouldn't fly open on its own. And it wasn't even windy out. I felt my stomach tighten. Couldn't help but think about that trucker saying someone was creeping around by the building. Maybe there really was someone. I quickly tried to shut my mind off from getting too paranoid and decided to finish up the dishes. Surely I was just scaring myself, I thought. I stayed there behind the counter and scrubbed all the leftover dishes from the earlier shifts. Through the clanking of all the dishware, I suddenly heard something else. It sounded like something moving. I quickly turned off the water and put down the plate I was cleaning. I heard it again. Before I could get around the corner to go check out what it was, a man came around the corner. He walked from the back room. This guy looked 40, with a grayish beard and medium, messy hair. He wore a navy blue, disheveled hoodie. He smiled and sat down at the bar seat while I just stood there, stunned and unsure how or what he was doing back there. Of course, I wanted to ask, but I was scared what answer I might get.
"I'll have a coffee, please."
The guy suddenly said, breaking the silence. I nodded and reluctantly started brewing it. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my head as I faced away from the counter. I just hoped if I got him what he wanted, he would leave. I handed him his drink, and he smiled.
"Just you here, huh? I bet it gets lonely. Doesn't seem like many people come around here at this time of night." Sometimes I guess, but it's not too bad."
I really hated every second of this guy being here, but he just kept talking.
"How long they make you work overnight for? 3, 4 a.m.?
I told him my shifts change around a lot, not wanting to give him any ideas of what my schedule was. Finally, he stood up and thanked me, giving another creepy smile as he walked out. I watched as he went up to the road, never getting into any car, and just walking until I couldn't see him anymore. My heart was still racing. Something about him was off, in a really creepy, unsettling way. I kept my eyes glued to the windows for the next 15 minutes. I guess it was just how little I knew about what was going on that made the whole thing so unsettling. Was this the guy the trucker was talking about, or was it someone else? If it was, then that would mean he'd been around the building for the last few hours, which would be just even more creepy. I really didn't want to go back to cleaning the dishes, or doing anything for that matter, as I felt really uncomfortable every time I had my back to the doors. But then, as I was still staring at the empty highway, I heard that same sound that I'd heard while in the restroom earlier. A door opening. But being in the main room, I knew it wasn't the front door. It was the side access door, like for going out to the dumpster. I hurried around the counter and looked into the hallway. It was dark back there, but one of the closet doors was moving back and forth, like someone had just gone through it. I instantly ran outside, got in my car, and got onto the highway, calling the police as I drove away. When the cops got there, surprisingly, the guy was still there, hiding in the closet. Same guy that came in and creeped me out. But that was far from the most disturbing thing they found. The guy had rope with him, and with a little more searching around, they found a stash partially dug up in the forest behind the diner. In it was basically a bunch of gear for doing, let's just say, horrible things. I guess he was eyeing the diner and eventually came in to be sure I was alone, before going back to the woods to get his stuff, so he could quickly grab me and drag me into the woods where the rest of his gear was. Thankfully, he's locked up for a long time now. I was staying with my brother at a cabin in northern Montana. It was in a dip between the mountains, tucked away in the trees. Both me and my brother Johnny were very outdoorsy, so this was a pretty typical trip for us, hanging out in the woods, going for hikes, and just exploring. Because of the drive, we spent the first day taking it slow, hanging around the cabin and enjoying the scenery without doing too much away from the cabin. I think it was around 5:30 when Johnny decided to go for a walk before it got dark. I didn't pay much attention and just looked over at him as he walked out and said all right. He didn't bring any backpack or anything, so I knew he was just going for something short. I laid back down and chilled on the couch near the fireplace. I was barely awake, exhausted from doing most of the driving earlier, but the cabin slowly got darker and darker as the sun fell behind the mountains. Only once it was just the fireplace lighting up the cabin did I realize Johnny hadn't come back yet, and obviously it was way too dark to be walking around still without any gear. I jumped up and grabbed my day bag, along with a headlamp and a flashlight, then headed out to make sure he was okay. My first thought was that we were in bear country, so I was pretty nervous about Johnny possibly running into one. Although, as I got deeper into the woods along the path, my nervousness shifted toward a different possibility. I kept getting a bad sense, making me look behind myself several times, as if expecting someone to be there. Never saw anything though. In just 10 minutes down the trail, I saw Johnny coming down toward me. He looked uneasy, and he wasn't in a dead sprint or anything, but he was moving fairly quickly, like he was trying to get away from something. We both started talking at the same time. I was trying to ask what was going on, and he was trying to tell me to turn back and get to the cabin. Eventually, we both just started fast walking back, getting back inside, where he then told me he saw someone watching him from out in the trees. He said the guy looked really creepy, and as he kept walking through the trail, the man almost seemed to be stalking him. Johnny thought if he just walked back to the cabin in the daylight, the guy might have followed him, so he waited till dark. Johnny, probably because he was the older brother, assured me it was likely nothing though, and he was just trying to be safe rather than sorry. I trusted him and tried not to worry about it. The guy he saw probably just had a cabin nearby too, or was on a hike. We made dinner, then sat out on the front porch for the rest of the night next to a campfire. I think both of us were also trying to keep watch for anyone watching us, but neither of us admitted it. The mountains got more quiet as the night went on. We talked around the campfire well into the night, going in later and sleeping until morning. After a short breakfast, we packed our bags and left to go on the main hike in the area, going up to the peak of one of the mountains, and taking around 6 hours. Both of us were super exhausted afterward. The last hour of walking back to the cabin felt like it dragged on. Heading in, Johnny tossed his bag down and said he was going to take a shower. I waited on the couch. The cabin only had 2 rooms and 1 bathroom, so I had to wait for him. I was only laying there for a minute though, when I randomly just remembered about the guy my brother was talking about yesterday. I got up and looked out the windows, almost expecting to see him out there. I went back over to the couch, but I just felt strange all of a sudden. A few more minutes went by, trying to figure out what it was I was feeling, when I noticed the obnoxious sound of the water pump for the shower hadn't started yet.
Johnny?
No response. I got up and walked down the hall toward the bedroom. I knocked on the door and said his name again. I felt something unsettling as I reached down and cracked open the door. I opened it slowly, maybe just a few inches, and could see Johnny between the crack in the door. He was kneeling down in the corner of the room, eyes wide open and staring at me, subtly shaking his head no, clearly telling me to go away. The fear in his eyes was so unnerving, it still is burned into my memory, clear as day. Just a horrifying sight I wish I never have to see again. I pushed the door open fully, seeing a man standing just a few feet from him. He also had wide eyes, but in a tired, disturbing way. He wore disheveled, torn-up clothes and had oily, long black hair. In that moment, I didn't have time to think. It was just my instant, unprocessed reaction to stop him. I charged at him, and only once I was a couple steps away, I saw him raise a gun from his side. I tackled him, and Johnny immediately knew what to do. We wrestled the gun away from him and got him mostly under control. I swear this guy was feral, screaming and screeching and clawing to try to get away. I'd never seen anything like it. He wasn't letting up either, so it took a while to figure out exactly how to get out of this. We decided Johnny, who was much bigger than I was, would hold him down while I got the car ready. I did as he said, quickly tossing our bags in the car, which had everything already packed in it from our recent hike. Then I turned the car on and got it ready. I went back in and we tried to tie him up with anything we could find around the cabin, just enough to let us get away, and obviously we took the gun with us. We could hear him screaming from inside the cabin as we drove away. Once we were in service, we notified police, but by the time they made it to the cabin, all the scraps we tied him up with were left amidst the floor, and the man was nowhere to be found. My brother said when he went into the room to shower, he was caught completely off guard and held at gunpoint, where he was told to call me into the room. My brother refused, knowing he'd be giving me no chance if he did, but then I walked in anyway. We still talk about how insane it was that I tackled the guy. Honestly, I can't even explain it, but it could have been what got us out of that cabin alive. Now, the only clue the authorities have as to who the guy was is from the gun that we gave them. They were able to figure out who it was registered to and found it belonged to a man who'd been missing 5 years, from somewhere about 50 miles away from where we were. However, from the description we gave them of what the guy looked like that attacked us, it seemed like it was probably someone else, which leads us to believe that whoever attacked us had also attacked the owner of the firearm, ultimately leaving him as a missing person. So, assuming things had gone any differently, that could have been mine and Johnny's fate as well. This was a while ago, 2014, when I was taking a gap year from college to travel the US out of my car. When I got to the East Coast, my cousin offered me to stay at his cabin just south of the Appalachian Mountains. I took the offer, knowing it'd be nice to have an actual place to stay and take a break for a few days. The cabin was nice, too. Honestly, it felt a lot more like a vacation home. Definitely a more modern cabin than the tiny log cabins you usually find in the middle of the forests. I was honestly sort of surprised after seeing it that my cousin let me stay there for free. I started moving a bunch of stuff from my car into the cabin before I went back out to grab whatever was left over and noticed someone watching me. They were out in the tree line, standing far from the path, and with nothing else but me in the house in his view, he had to be looking at me. Maybe they weren't trying to be creepy though, and I didn't know the area. For all I knew, there could have been cabins and houses all around here, just past the trees and out of sight. I grabbed the rest and locked my car, bringing it inside, and saw the man still out there, facing the cabin as I closed the door. I sent a text to my cousin, letting him know I got in okay and was all good, but also that someone was out there watching me. I just asked if he knew who it might have been. He texted me back while I was unpacking, but I forgot to check it until nearly an hour later, well past when the sun had set. My cousin said the cabin was on 40 acres of his property, with a fence around the whole area. Nobody else should have been out there. That immediately made me feel way worse about what I saw. I mean, before I didn't care all that much, But now it was pretty strange that they were on the property, just staring at me from afar. I went and looked outside again, but beyond the lights from the cabin, it was pitch black. I couldn't even see up to the tree line. It was just complete darkness all around. It gave me a chill as I closed the curtains. I tried to cool off by watching a movie and resting in the bedroom. The movie helped keep my mind occupied, but it didn't relieve the sense completely. And just about an hour into it, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I looked, locking my eyes on the window, where there was a gap in the curtains. I thought I might have just seen something move over there, but now all I could see was my blurry reflection on the glass, and only darkness behind it. I quickly got up and started walking toward it, when there were suddenly footsteps sprinting through the grass. By the time I was looking out the window, I couldn't see anything, and could only faintly hear the footsteps going further into the dark. I immediately called my cousin. I don't know why I didn't just go straight to calling the cops, but my cousin told me to, so I hung up and had the cops on the way within a minute. For how far out the cabin was, the officer made it there in a decent amount of time. However, the guy who had been watching me was long gone, and we both realized pretty quick that there wasn't all that much he could do about it. He couldn't go searching the woods, or really do anything at all, unless the guy showed up again and hung around long enough for the officer to come back. So I was left alone again. I really couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had for the entire rest of that night. I could have left, but honestly, the thought of bringing all my stuff out to the car, going back and forth from the cabin in the middle of the dark, was more unsettling than just hunkering down inside. Of course, I couldn't help but look out the windows over and over, even though I couldn't see anything at all. For the last hour before bed, it must have been 12 or 1 a.m., and I was just pacing the house, double-checking everything, and trying to feel safer about going to sleep. I think I was just pushing it off as much as I could, but it was inevitable. I had to rest. I turned off all the lights in the cabin, headed to the bedroom, and locked myself in. I hoped the worst was behind me and got in bed, falling asleep 30 minutes later. I woke up early, like very early, way too early for it to be right. The sun wasn't even up yet, so it had to be around 4 a.m., which meant I'd only slept for a few hours. Almost immediately, my mind went back into that panic state, feeling the need to do a check around the cabin again. There would be no way I could go back to sleep without walking around first to make sure I was still okay. I got up and turned on the hallway light, then just listened for a second. I didn't hear anything but the heavy wind hitting the thin windows throughout the cabin. I started walking, but only got halfway down before hearing something else. It sounded like a couple thumps on the end of the cabin. I knew there was a small library kind of room and a kitchen on that end. I crept a bit closer, and through the lights from the hallway, I could see the shadow of something moving near the end. I froze up, wanting to not believe the situation I was in. But the shadow suddenly stopped moving. There was a few seconds, then it slowly started moving again, before a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Just from the shape of the figure, I knew it was the same guy that had been watching me, the one I saw out in the trees. I turned around and locked myself back in the bedroom. The silence that followed was deafening. I thought he'd chase me, or try to attack me, or even break down the door. But it was just silent. I could hear my heart pounding. Then a few slow footsteps moved down the hall, right up to the other side of the door, and the man just stood out there. I clenched my phone in my hand, wanting to call for help, but thinking he might hear me and decide to speed up the process of whatever he had planned. So instead, I made the sporadic decision to grab my keys, open the window, and make a run for my car. I got in and sped away from the cabin. When it was all said and done, cops got there and found nobody. The man had entered from a window on the far end that had a broken lock. Whether he had broken it, or it already was, is undetermined. But the cops also found the bedroom door open. The lock on it was just one of those standard pushpin ones. Regardless, that meant the man was prepared to open the door, and was going to at any minute. So if I tried to stay there and wait for police, I wouldn't have gotten out so easily. What's really weird is he was there from the moment I arrived at the cabin, which likely means he'd been watching the place for a while, maybe waiting for me or someone to arrive. What he really was intending, I luckily didn't have to find out. In 2016, I made a trip down to my father's old cabin. It was 6 hours away in the woods outside of the hometown he grew up in, which was no longer even a town. Just an abandoned row of old buildings and stores along a deserted road. We'd never really go to his cabin because he said there wasn't much of a reason to once the town was gone. But after he passed away, I figured it'd be nice to take a trip down there to visit the home he once built. I knew it'd be in real bad shape, and I wanted to do some restorations on it as best I could, just to keep it standing and preserve it for as long as possible. If anything, I hoped the trip would clear my mind a little and give me some peace and quiet. I drove there, arriving at the town and parking my car behind one of the abandoned gas station buildings. Then walked on the thin, rugged, winding trail 2 miles up to the cabin. I had all my backpacking gear, and brought along the tools I'd need for the job. There was a part of me that knew it might have toppled already, so I was prepared to camp the night in a tent if I had to. Luckily, after making the long trek through the woods though, I found the cabin still standing. It was in a small clearing in the trees. Just a basic, rectangular log cabin, with vines and greenery growing up the outer walls. When I walked in, I noticed there were no locks on the door, and found the interior to be in pretty awful shape. Trash scattered everywhere, and a musty, unpleasant smell filling the room. It was clear that at some point, someone realized this place wasn't in use, and probably had stayed here, maybe for a while. Although it seemed it wasn't recent. No signs of anything being there for a couple years or so. I moved what I could into the corner of the room, making a flat space to put my stuff, and with the sun already setting, I unrolled my sleeping bag and just settled in. I should mention, although I didn't hear or see anything that night, I couldn't sleep for any longer than 30 minutes at a time, before waking up with a strange, disturbing feeling. It made for a really bad night. I got up at sunrise, groggy and wondering if this whole trip was a mistake. I used my little camping stove to brew up a coffee, then took a walk through the woods to clear my head. It was still kind of dark, the sun only barely peeking out through the trees. A little ways in, I found an overlook, sort of a hill where I could see above the tree line. Thought it'd be a great place to watch the sunrise, but I found something else. I could see the abandoned town from up there. It was very far away, but there was a light. Looked like it was from a window in one of the buildings. I couldn't tell from that distance if it was from a house or a store, and it turned off suddenly a minute later. It made me worry a bit about my car, but mostly I was just surprised anyone else was around here. Likely, it was just some urban explorers checking out the town, and nothing to worry about, although it was a really big coincidence. I sat on the hill for an hour watching the sun come up, then walked back through the woods to start working on the cabin. First thing was to reseal and clean up the outside. I will say though, the whole time I was out there working, I kept getting that feeling, the one I had during the night. Every time I looked back at the woods, this eerie sense loomed over me. It took me a bit to really understand what it was that I felt, but eventually I managed to grasp what I think it was. I felt like I wasn't alone. I kept working, but constantly looked over my shoulder. The possibility of anyone else being out here was genuinely impossible. The abandoned town, sure, but here, some random woods with nothing but a decaying cabin. I thought I must have been on edge for reasons that were beyond me. Once the sun was going down, I headed inside, testing out the old wood stove. These things seemed to be undying, as it fired up no problem and warmed up the cabin. I sat near it and just watched the flames, listening to it crackle as I thought about everything. My dad, this trip, just life in general. But sometime later in the night, the crackles in the flame were suddenly accompanied by a similar sound. Cracks and crunching coming from the front of the cabin. I turned my head and listened. I only managed to realize it wasn't a wild animal and was definitely a person just as they got up to the front door. The wood stove suddenly felt like it was 1,000 times louder, preventing me from intently listening to whoever the hell was outside the cabin. Then they knocked and called out a name that made my whole world stop for a moment. The man called out my dad's name. It felt like it just took hold of me, making me stand up and walk up to the other side of the door in complete shock. How did he know my dad? I couldn't resist calling out and asking who he was. The man outside hesitated. I think he knew after I spoke that I wasn't my dad.
I'm an old friend of the man who built this cabin. Was hoping I'd get to see him again.
The unknown man spoke. I got a little closer to the door, the urge to open it and have someone to talk to about my dad, to hear stories and everything. But still, something kept me from opening it. Why was he even here? I asked, and the man said he lived in that old town. After thinking for a second, I decided to share that I was the son of the man he was looking for, my dad, and he had passed away. The man behind the door paused.
I'm real sorry to hear that, kid. Wish I could have seen him one more time.
Initially, it felt nice to hear that, but I quickly sensed something was off about the way he said it. Something in his voice. It wasn't the sadness I was expecting from someone who just found out they lost a friend. Before I could say anything, and almost like he knew I was thinking too hard about it, the man continued talking.
Why don't you open up and we can have a chat? It's real cold out here, son. Would be nice to share that fire.
Although he talked very slowly, I sensed an urgency or a lack of patience in his voice. Something in me felt he wasn't being truthful, that maybe he wasn't who he said he was. Sure, he knew my dad's name and was in the town he used to live in, but how did I know he was really a friend of his? Still, as I was thinking, I couldn't find what words to say next, and in my pause, the man asked again for me to open up. He knocked on the door again, a little harsher. His voice grew less kind and more demanding. I took a few steps from the door, backing away.
Kid, open the door. You gonna let me die out here in the cold? That what your father would want from you.
My heart began pounding as I dug into my backpack for my hunting knife. The man continued hitting the door and yelling subtle threats, discarding the fake identity of being a kind, harmless friend. This went on for much longer than I could keep track of. It felt like it never ended, some continuous nightmare. But suddenly, the man punched the door in anger, and it was followed by the sound of his footsteps walking away, going back into the woods. I stayed up all night, mind racing as I waited in fear. But when the sun came up, and with no signs of him around, I hurriedly packed my bag and ran from the cabin. I got really lucky, finding my car untouched, still well hidden behind the crumbling gas station. I fled from the town and drove non-stop back home. I was hoping with that trip I'd get some answers, or come to terms with everything. But honestly, I'm just left with more questions. I realized I never even really knew why my dad moved away from there. I guess I assumed it was because the town was dying off and everyone else was leaving. But now I think there was probably more to it. And maybe there were other reasons that he'd never brought me back to his cabin. I don't know why that man was still around there, or what he really wanted from me, or how he even knew my dad at all. But something tells me he didn't have any good intentions that night. Had I let my emotions get the better of me and opened the door to invite him in, I genuinely don't think I ever would have made it out of that town.
In elementary school, my group of friends had a tradition that we followed anytime one of us had a birthday. On birthdays, all 6 of us would go to Dylan's house and have a sleepover party in the cool little guest house his parents had on their massive property. It was Dylan's birthday, and his parents had gone all out with decorating the house and buying tons of snacks. They even set up a movie projector. Without any parents to keep us in check, we stayed up past midnight and completely trashed the place once one of the boys started a food fight with the Twizzlers. At one point, we all went outside to play tag. When we got back, something felt wrong. There weren't nearly as many candies on the floor as there were when we left. I told the others, but they didn't really care. Dylan said it looked the same to him, so I ignored my instincts and got back to messing around. Finally, around 1 o'clock, we settled down and started to go to bed. I went out while they were still talking, and the last thing I heard was some dumb talk about girls at school and crushes. I was way too heavy a sleeper, so I was asleep before they said any details. At some point in the early morning, something crashed onto the floor from one of the snack tables. I shot out of my sleeping bag and found a bowl of popcorn spilled all over the carpet. It looked like it was put too close to the edge of the table last night. The second thing I immediately noticed was that the room was completely empty. My friends were nowhere to be found. I started to shout out my missing friends' names one by one, and I could feel my throat get a bit tighter after each time there was no reply. It was pitch dark and completely quiet. I got up and wandered around for the light, but I had no idea where it was. After some pointless searching, I heard something that froze me in the middle of a step. There was a shallow, raspy breathing coming from the corner of the room. There was a spot where 2 bookshelves came together that left a square opening against the corner of the wall, and it sounded like the breathing was coming from there. It actually made me relieved. I was sure they had come up with a prank. Even the night before, Dylan had said something about the house having a bunch of great hiding places. I called out Dylan's name and told him he could come out, but nothing came back, just like before. It was kind of annoying. They all knew that I didn't like pranks, and I didn't want to be the butt of the joke, so I walked to the couch and stood on top, where I could see into the hole. I looked over the top of the bookshelves and saw the top of someone's head. I knew right away it wasn't Dylan. Their hair was going gray in parts and had bald patches. I lost my balance on the couch and fell against the shelves. As I connected, the person in that dark hiding space whipped their head in my direction and stared straight at me with those gray, dead eyes. I screamed, and that person shrieked like an animal back. I jumped off the couch before sprinting across the lawn to the main house. That person didn't follow me, as far as I could tell. I shouted for Dylan's parents and told them that there was a guy hiding in the guest house. Dylan's mom held me while I cried, and his dad grabbed a bat and ran to the house. But by the time he got there, the man was gone. My friends came back a few minutes later and couldn't believe what had happened. I found out later that they decided to watch the sunset over the lake while I was sleeping. They were all shaken up, and we stayed in the main house in silence while the cops eventually came. I never learned anything more about that guy, But we all decided to end the birthday tradition and started to keep our sleepovers close enough to parents to feel a bit safer. I slept in my parents' room for nearly a year after that, and since then, I get hit with a new wave of fear whenever I see something that looks like a perfect hiding place. When I was a kid, I would have done anything to fit in. I wasn't very popular in middle school, but there was one group of girls I finally managed to get in with from my field hockey team. They were planning a big sleepover at a girl named Rachel's house, and I saw an opportunity to score some points. My house is pretty huge, and we had a nice living room with a pool table and TV. I told them they could have their sleepover at my place, and just as I'd hoped, they went along with it. There were a total of 6 of us. My parents were so happy that I finally had some friends over that they didn't set a curfew or keep an eye on us. It went well at first, with some truth or dare and a gossip that I didn't really understand. I really thought I was on the right track with them. Then a knock at the door stopped the party. It was late enough that my parents were already asleep, so I couldn't imagine who would be at our house at that time. I told the others that I would check it out, and I walked up to the people. Standing on the porch was a tall, thin man wearing a beaten jacket and torn pants. He was so tall that his head was out of sight. The man must have heard my footsteps, because right when I came to the people, he bent down and put his face right against the door. He had long, matted hair that covered his eyes, and his teeth were brown. I jumped back and ran to the living room. The girls gave me a strange look and asked if something was wrong. At that point, I should have told my parents, but I didn't want to ruin the night for everyone else. I was tense while we were watching the next movie. I prayed that whoever that man was left when nobody came to the door. But almost an hour after I first saw him, I heard someone muttering the name Mary through the crack in the window near the door. I was the only one who heard it, so I told the girls I had to use the bathroom and went to slam the window shut. I know it's really stupid that I let it go after that, but I was young and desperate. When I went to slam the window shut, there was nobody there. After that, I checked the locks on the other entrances and went back to the sleepover. There was no chance I'd enjoy the rest of that night. The others didn't even seem tired. When my turn came for this game about our crushes, I took so long to respond that they just skipped me. After things had started to settle, I heard muffled cries coming from the backyard. The other girls heard it too, but I told them it was nothing and that I'd check it out again. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a small knife. Not that it would do me any good, but having a weapon helped me feel a little less shaky. From the kitchen, I saw the same man from the porch standing on the grass, shouting at the sky. He kept repeating the same name, Mary. Somehow he noticed me. I could see his eyes. They were pitch black, not reflecting any of the light. He sprinted off to the side of the house before I could even move a muscle. It was too much for me to keep quiet, so I ran through the kitchen and past the living room. Chloe, one of the girls, asked what the sound was, but I didn't reply. Instead, I shouted for my dad. Dad heard me and came rushing downstairs. The girls were all up and trying to figure out what was going on when something started banging on the door. Dad told us all to get upstairs, and he grabbed a bat from the closet. The person outside slammed against the door, then pressed his face against the window, showing off his pale, scarred skin. The whole time, he kept roaring Mary's name like a beast. Dad took up the bat and threw open the door. The man ran off to the driveway before Dad could get his hands on him. The man stood in the driveway completely still while Dad yelled at him to get out and that he was calling the cops. The man put his head in his hands and shook like he was crying. I could just barely make out his last words, begging Mary for forgiveness before he walked off into the night. None of us slept that night. We crowded my parents' room, and the girls' families all picked them up the next day. That was the last time I hung out with any of them. Their parents wouldn't even let them near my place after what went down. I asked Dad why that man was shouting for that woman, Mary, and he had no idea. It turned out a woman named Mary lived in that house before us, but we never got any more information about her. We all got out safe, and that guy never came back, but he still managed to ruin my first and only sleepover. Certain nights never leave you. Even when the morning comes, they're still there. The world becomes hazy. You wonder if it's day or night. I can't tell at this point. It's as if everything started to look a little less bright, and my eyes lost some of their luster. I was 11 when the sleepover happened, when my best friend Mark decided to come over and survive the winter. The heating and warm blankets took care of that problem. By then, my parents had already divorced, and I'd lived with my mom. She was in bed, exhausted from work, so it was just us. We ate popcorn while playing Monopoly, shining the flashlight to see because the power had already gone out. The wind was intense, and you could hear the house creak underneath its pressure. Every so often, you felt a draft sweep through the hall, the candles flickering from the influx of air. This indoor camping was an adventure for both of us, navigating through the spaces, nooks, and crannies of the house to get to my room. Soon we were curled up in bed, wrapped in warm blankets as we whispered to each other dumb jokes, talking about other kids in school. My eyes started to get heavy, so I told Mark I would sleep at some point. I lay my head on my pillow, and for a moment, peace. And then I heard it. It was a whisper, coming from across the room. Low, but distinguishable. I turned toward Mark. Maybe he said something to me? When I looked over, he had already closed his eyes, looking like he was drifting to sleep. Maybe I just imagined it? I mean, the house is old, and it's pretty windy outside. The heater isn't on either, so everything sounds a little louder without it. I pulled my blanket close as I tried to drift to sleep. But then I heard it again. It was clearer this time. Still barely audible, but in a breathy voice. I could distinguish the words. "Don't wake them up." My heart spiked. I didn't dare move a muscle. And then I heard shuffling. I quickly looked over at Mark, who had apparently been stirred from his sleep. He opened one eye, exhausted, yet confused. "What?" he whispered to me. So he heard it too. "You didn't just say that, did you?" I asked Mark. "No." He shook his head. My suspicions were confirmed. I had heard something else. The candle on my dresser flickered, illuminating some of the room while stretching shadows. "It's just the wind," I told myself. "It's just in your head." But the energy seemed to shift. Since I heard the whisper, the cold didn't feel like it was coming from the draft anymore. It was coming from the presence of something else. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. I got up, forcing myself to put my fears to rest. My legs struggled to move. I crossed the room, checking the window. It was cracked slightly open, allowing some snow to blow in. I shoved the window down, but as I began to latch it, I heard it again. The whisper, "Don't wake them up." I instantly turned. My eyes met Mark, sitting straight up now, wide awake, staring past me. The flashlight beam couldn't hold steady, as if Mark was trembling. Mark whispered, and I still remember the terror in his voice. "Someone's there." I followed where the light illuminated the room, and suddenly I saw movement in the far corner of the room. I thought it was a shadow at first, but as the light remained, the outline could no longer be hidden from our sight. It was a crouched figure. You could barely make out his appearance. But I'll never forget that face, pale, hollow-eyed, lit by only the dimming light of the candle. His hair was damp. Movement again. His finger pressed to his cracked lips. He made the gesture of silence. Shh. Mark couldn't contain his fear. He gasped in terror, dropping the flashlight unintentionally. The beams illuminated the ceiling as the flashlight rolled across the floor. The man was moving again. Slowly, he pushed himself upright. His joints creaked, louder than they should be. We could see him now, barefoot. Barefoot. He wore ragged clothes, and his eyes betrayed his cunningness. He did not move like a drunk man or someone who appeared lost. No, he appeared. It all appeared intentional. I couldn't even look back at Mark. I would be grabbed the moment I turned. All I could do was whisper under my breath, just audible enough for Mark to hear it. Run. The man stepped forward as the floor creaked. We bolted at the first step. I screamed at the top of my lungs as Mark yanked me out of the room out of the man's grasp. Our bare feet pounded down the hall, and then we heard a second set of footsteps, heavier footsteps, closing in faster than expected. We sprinted to my mom's bedroom, slamming the door, fumbling for the lock until it finally clicked. "Mom!" I screamed. My voice cracked under the pressure of the distress. She woke up, confused at first, then alarmed as the doorknob rattled violently. A pause, then a slam. The wood buckled under the impact as the man continued to break through the door. My mom shrieked, rushing to the phone and dialing 911, her fingers trembling, barely able to hold on to the device that might save our lives. The man grew furious. His voice hissed, "Open up and don't make a noise." The frame of the door shook under another kick. I thought my lungs would give out, burning as I gasped for air. My heart was ready to take its last beat before this man did. Any second, that door would break down. But I was met with silence. The pounding had stopped, and the knob stilled. It was just the distant howl of the storm in the room now. Minutes crawled by, and the man was nowhere to be heard. Soon, the red and blue lights pierced through the window, sending a sensation of hope. The police officers swept through the house immediately after we let them in and told them what had happened. When they looked, however, no one was there. Upstairs, the window was wide open in the room, and snow pelted across the carpet. I traced the snow until I saw something on the fogged glass. 2 words, written backwards so they could easily be read from the inside. They were smeared with a finger, and all it read was, "Don't tell."
In my late teens and early 20s, I was friends with a girl named Lucy. She was a very lonely kind of girl whose parents were, well, honestly, really shitty parents. Her mother was verbally abusive and her father really couldn't care less about anything. Because of the lack of love in her life, Lucy searched through dating sites for love and comfort from strange men, and she was not afraid of meeting them face to face, even if they've been chatting only for a few days. My friendship with Lucy was a strange one. Found her quite annoying sometimes, but I always felt awful for her because of her loneliness and lack of friends and love in her life. Sometimes I really didn't want to hang out with her, and some days I would accept her offer to hang out. When it was just her and me together, she was normal and okay to be around, but also very appreciative of having someone giving her attention. We had a small group of friends, and she would try to get all of us together as often as possible, and honestly, the whole group together was really quite fun. When we were all together, Lucy was very hyper, and you could just tell that she was happy to be around people who didn't insult her as her mother does. Suddenly, Lucy tells us that she has a boyfriend. We were all surprised because we knew she met a lot of guys online, but we had never heard her say she was dating someone. A few days later, she sets up a day for our friend group to meet Trevor. None of us were looking forward to it because we thought he was going to be like all the others, a temporary boy toy. When we met him, we all felt awkward. He barely spoke a word, and he wouldn't look directly at any of us at all. Lucy would try to be funny, but he would just give her dirty looks. Needless to say, we thought he was a weird one and could tell he didn't care much for her. As the days went on, Lucy kept telling me how much Trevor did not like me. This was weird because nobody ever disliked me. I'm always polite and respectful, and I smile a lot at everyone, but for some reason he didn't like me. She kept saying he thinks I'm using Lucy for her money. Not sure how he thought that since I paid for everything for Lucy. To keep this piece of the story short, I think he was trying to find reasons to convince her to get rid of me. I got a terrible vibe from Trevor. He dressed like he didn't care about life, never smiled, didn't shake our hands when first meeting us. He stank of weed, and he really had an overall uncomfortable feeling about him. After months of Trevor trying to convince Lucy that I am a terrible friend, and she would not hang out with me anymore, she started to do as she said. she would start to hide me from him. If she and I were together and he would call her on her phone, she would lie and say I wasn't there. If she was with a group of friends, he would have her swear I wasn't there. When he was going to be joining the group on an outing or just hanging out at her place, she would tell me I couldn't come. Lucy will do whatever her boyfriend says just to keep pleasing him so she doesn't lose him. Now here's where it gets scary. Lucy calls me one day and says she wants me to come hang out at her place. I agreed. She came to pick me up and we went to her house and watched TV for a bit. We then decided, since it's a nice day outside, we could take her 2 dogs for a walk to a nearby park and would later return to the house to have lunch together. While at this park, she receives a phone call. Now, let me say that Lucy is not a private person whatsoever and has never ever walked away to answer a phone call until this day. She walked far enough away that she knew I would not be able to hear anything she said. That was suspicious to me, but not enough to question it. The call ends and she begins walking toward me with a look on her face as if she's trying not to smile. She tells me, "So, I need to bring you home now." I was slightly confused as we had only been together for about an hour, when we usually spend the entire day together, and she would never want me to go home. She would even frequently beg me to sleep over to avoid being alone. So anyway, I said okay, and we walked to drop off her dogs at home and got into her car and off we went. About 10 minutes into the car ride, I realized she wasn't going in the direction of my house, so I questioned it. "Where are we going?" She smirked but didn't respond. I asked again, laughing uncomfortably. "Seriously, where are we going?" She continued to smile but didn't want to answer me. I started to realize she was heading in the direction of where her boyfriend lived. Oh hell no. I asked one last time with anger in my voice, "Where are you taking me?" Her only response was bone-chilling to me. "Trevor wants to talk to you." Nope, no way. I wasn't having any of this. I insisted and demanded she let me out of the car, but with her evil smile and same response, she said it again. "It's okay, he just wants to talk to you." I was furious at this point because this creepy guy who looks like he wants to kill someone, who also despised me, wanted to talk to me. Why can't he talk to me on the phone? Why do I need to go to his sketchy apartment? She absolutely refused to let me out of the car. She had the doors locked as if I wasn't able to unlock my passenger door. I waited until she reached a red light, grabbed her wallet from the back seat, took out her bus pass, and bolted out of the car. I had no idea where I was or where the nearest bus stop was, but I was not about to let her crazy-ass boyfriend do whatever he wanted to me. She yelled for me to get back in the car, but of course I ignored her. She sped off furiously. I immediately blocked her number on my phone. I removed her as a friend on social media, and I immediately warned the group of friends not to talk to her because she has gone nuts. I have not spoken to her since that very day, and she also lost the other 5 friends of the group as well. This happened a few years ago when I was around 20 or so. I was hanging out with my buddy Matt at my apartment, located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes, etc. He mentions that he has a close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother. She now lives across the street from me, and he thought it would be a swell idea if we met, because apparently we are very similar, and I was single and ready to mingle at that point in my life. He rings her cell and tells her to come by to my place. She arrived at the apartment, and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, very pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30, or about 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that are much older for some reason. We played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt decided to go home, leaving us 2 alone. We chilled for a little while, ended up making out, and I got all of her contact info before she told me she's going home and that we should meet up soon. Over the next few weeks, we developed a strong relationship and we hang out almost daily. I would throw some pajamas on and walk across the street, and we'd get wasted and watch movies. It was awesome. After arriving home from my 10-day trip to New York City, things got really weird. The day I returned, she asked if she could come over, so I unpacked my stuff and then told her to stop by. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking non-stop about all the awesome things I did, and people I met in New York City, and I could immediately tell she didn't want to hear any of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up, and eventually she said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't give a shit." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily I had been getting to know was not like this. She was caring and passionate and an amazing person, so I thought. Fast forward to a few nights later, I had just gotten home from working a 12-hour shift and I collapsed in bed, ready to pass out for the night. It's about 9 p.m. and I get a text from Emily that says, "Hey, what's up?" I don't feel much like replying at the moment. I'm too exhausted and our last hangout was too weird for me to comprehend, so I am still trying to decide how to deal with that. I plug my phone into charge, turn the lights off, and fall asleep effortlessly. And suddenly, I hear 3 loud bangs. I wake up to somebody pounding on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs. "Open the damn door. Let me in now." My entire apartment reeks like cigarette smoke. I grab my phone from beside my bed and my heart beating a million miles per hour. 27 missed phone calls, a bunch of text messages, all from Emily. I scan through the texts while she's at the door screaming, trying to break my door down. The most recent text from her is a long one claiming I'm a piece of shit for not responding to her text earlier and that she's coming over to beat the shit out of me for not doing so. She had a key to the building from when she used it to live there. I get out of bed, nearly having a panic attack, and try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door and calm her? Should I call the police? Should I just ignore her? I decide to open the door. She immediately begins wailing on me, swinging her arms trying to hit me. She was smoking a cigarette, and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. Smoking indoors was prohibited in my apartment building. She was very obviously on some sort of drug. She kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding to her text message, slurring her speech and losing her balance. I was somehow able to calm her down, and I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice little enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another. She was quiet now, finally. She kept asking me how I could be such an asshole and that I needed to explain myself. The look in her eyes was pure evil as she spoke to me in a calm demeanor now. I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I take her home and return to my apartment to attempt sleeping, at which I do not succeed. A couple of days later, I return home from work and there is an envelope taped on my door. I open it and it's a handwritten letter from Emily apologizing and saying that I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a literal candy bar attached to the envelope, one that I had never heard of that she always told me I needed to try. Never spoke to her again. From what Matt tells me, which by the way, he always knew she was a problematic person, she is a heavy user of crack now and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. I worked as an infrastructure manager in the corporate office of a minor retail chain about 14 years ago. The conditions were kind of sucky, so the IT staff were mostly a good group of funny dudes and dudettes who tried to make the most of it and got along great. The software development lead was a pale, pudgy mid to late 30s guy named Philip. Philip had an untreated condition that caused him to compulsively lie constantly and without hesitation. Not little lies, big ones, straight-faced. No matter what the topic was, he would add in. Sometimes we would bring up subjects to see what he would say. It didn't matter if it was one-on-one or in a car with 4 bros. He did it all the time. Since a common drinking thing with friends is asking me to list Philip's lies around the fire, I'll just rattle off some for context. A mouse was getting into his cupboards. He taught it to talk by using M&Ms as positive reinforcement. He got his high school marching band signed to a record contract. He could kick 90-yard field goals, but NFL teams passed on him because he had 3 heart attacks. He was a sole survivor of 2 plane crashes. Once, he stole a fire truck to put out his neighbor's bonfire because smoke was getting in his house. When he took it back, he parallel parked it, and they were so impressed they offered him a job. He was tired of his computer crashing, so he hacked into Microsoft and fixed their source code. He built a model rocket at science camp and landed it on the moon. He was disqualified from the Moto X Big Air competition at the X Games for getting into a fight. He ripped up his diploma and gave his high school principal a tombstone piledriver off the stage during graduation. He used to do falconry, but with bald eagles. As a kid, he was some sort of encyclopedia ground for the FBI or CIA. Said he had multiple #1 hit songs, popular video game premises, and the entire concept and name of MySpace came from a notebook he had stolen from his car. You get the point. It was weird. It was also stuff like, "Sorry, I'm late getting back from lunch. Some guy tried to rob the grocery store, so I jumped across the register and choked them out. They wanted me to stay and talk to the police, but I was worried he would press charges when he woke up." I know this probably doesn't have the impact it should, but it's hard to explain how odd it is to have like a 40-year-old dude in a nice shirt and tie tell you that when he test drives a car, he takes it to his place where he can do a backflip in it, saying he only buys cars that survive the backflip, and that's how he ended up with a Hyundai you're sitting in. It sucks the air out of the room, like when someone is yelling on the subway. Once, one of the owners called me and said, "None of you guys were around, so they sent that Philip guy to help me. Never let that guy anywhere near our suite again. He's messed up." No idea what happened, but I heard it had something to do with Babylon 5. Anyway, the other guys would sort of egg him on at times. I honestly didn't. I felt really bad because I would think about if he knew he was doing it, when he was doing it, and how that made him feel. Like, "You are doing it again, Philip." Perhaps knowing he might not get away with it this time, or it was one more thing to keep track of in the lexicon. What I was pretty firm about was that nobody was going to call him out on it. Mostly because I didn't know what he would do, but also because I didn't want to work in an environment where every day was some bullshit argument, and it wasn't really fair to him. He couldn't help it. I made sure every new hire knew the rules. I had been there for about 3 years and never had any sort of untoward interactions to him or about him. If anything, I was overly empathetic of what it must be like. All we truly knew about him was he lived in a mobile home on his family's property, which had a giant fountain from a Vegas casino in it because he knew a guy who dismantled one and smuggled it to him. And he had married his wife when he was 31 and she was 16, which required parental consent in our state. She had rented an office in an insurance company to convince him she too was in her 30s. Big, weird, eventful jump forward. One day, Philip was sitting in the developer suite and out of nowhere said, "Hey Ricky," another developer, "check this out." He had a picture of himself with guns and tactical gear. He said, "I asked for the Cho VTech Shooter Special. Tomorrow, I will be dead. He's been trying to steal my power. You may want to call in sick." I was thankful with everything in my body that Ricky just said, "Cool man," then got up, went straight to legal and reported it. Philip got let out in handcuffs and termed. He obviously wasn't held too long for threats. The police told me to keep my doors locked and my curtains closed until it all blew over. I cleaned the garage out so we could park in it and limit the time exposed outside. It was a tense few months for my girlfriend and I. It was well known that I used to have to go into work super early to cover for my engineers on Fridays, before anybody else was there, just me in a big empty parking lot. I remember thinking on every drive over that it was likely my last day on Earth and how I just hope I don't hear anything first before it happens. When I closed on my first house, I teared up a little bit. People thought I was being sentimental, but I was thinking about how Philip, finally, doesn't know where to find me. It kind of messed Ricky up and he soon quit. I once asked him what made him report it in spite of the normal stream of we were all used to, and he said, "This guy was talking about power like he was Skeletor or some shit." Ricky's on my Facebook feed constantly with very angry and opposing political views as me, and I've never put that dude on snooze once. I'm thankful for anything he has to say. As a weird follow-up, I met the guy's cousin a few years later. The dude told me that Philip and his wife had a weird relationship. Like, she would buy Philip nothing but toys for Christmas. No action figures or Funko, etc. The dude telling me he collected action figures and movie props, but like airplanes and dinosaurs and fire trucks. And he would just sit around on the floor playing with them, making noises. It wasn't a weird sexual thing, just another big red flag flapping in the breeze.
Some nights just never seem to go away, no matter how much you tell them to leave. It's like they stamp themselves into your memory. People notice the burns but never know the pain as if it were their own. I doubt anyone can relate to the night my truck gave out on the side of that freeway. I was 20 at the time, Broke like any other kid my age, driving a vehicle that coughed more than it purred or repressed the girls. I couldn't even estimate how much gas was in the tank after the gauge went out on me, so I reset my trip odometer every time I filled up. It was sketchy to say the least, but the method worked well enough to get me from point A to point B, at least until tonight. I had just visited my friend in San Antonio, and I was cruising down Route 90 with just the hum of tires traversing the asphalt in the background. Occasionally I saw a jackrabbit dart in whichever direction. It was close to midnight now. The road was so empty it felt like I was the only one in the state still awake, trying to get somewhere. That's when my engine sputtered. Oh no, not now. I gripped the wheel, praying to prevent the inevitable disaster ahead of me. Come on, you old truck, not now. I tapped on gas. Nothing but the truck started, lurching forward in a last desperate attempt, before completely dying on me. The headlights decided they wanted to quit on me too, leaving with nothing but a pocket of darkness and endless trees for a background. Then I tried my next logical course of action, my phone. I grabbed it in hopes that it still had no bars. Great. Well, throw on the hazards. There they went. The click noise signaling my emergency was the only noise interrupting the night's eerie calm. Someone's got to pass soon, I told myself. I started to doze off by the time the headlights appeared in the mirror. I looked at my phone and an hour had passed. I was relieved, that is, until the car didn't keep its beams on. It pulled up behind me, lights off, and slowly came to a halt on the shoulder. The engine shut off moments later, then silence. I stared in my rearview mirror to see who it was, but nothing moved. That's not good. I assumed any second now that the door would open, a voice would call out, or some sort of movement. Nothing. Just a black truck sitting too close for comfort and an occupant who had yet to reveal themselves. After waiting for 10 seconds, curiosity got the best of me. That, and the desperation of the situation. I stepped into the cold, yelling out, "Hey." I could hear my voice carry in the distance. No response. I got closer. I was committed by now. The truck grew larger as I approached, but I still couldn't get a picture of the figure inside. The voice would call out, or some sort of movement. Nothing. Maybe I should have just stayed inside. Finally, the door creaked. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged slowly from the vehicle, stepping outside without a sound. From the glow of my hazards, I could see his wide grin. He finally asked, "You all right, buddy?" Ran out of gas, I responded nervously. That's a shame. His smile started to send alarm signals shooting. Give me a hand with something, would you? The request wouldn't be a problem under normal circumstances, but considering my truck no longer worked, my phone had no service in the middle of the night, with a mysterious man who's now asking for help. Calm, yet some sort of ferocity tempered underneath the surface. I hesitated. I don't think I can. The man chuckled softly, as if my response wasn't a genuine answer. He tilted his head, then demanded suddenly, "Empty your pockets then." What? I knew something was wrong, but what were my options? There was no one around, and I didn't know whether this man had a knife or a gun in his pockets. I didn't have any weapons, and at this point, I'm considering going back to my car and locking it. My chest is clenching at this point. "Empty your pockets," he repeated again, only this time his smile widened. He got closer. This was all spiraling too fast for me to process. The trees were too still, the night too quiet, and that grin, that stupid, terrifying grin. This could escalate in moments. And then it did. The man lunged at me, his smile dropping pretentiously. He made an attempt to grab me as his voice dropped to a rumble. "Don't make me hurt you." I didn't take any chances to find out what the man wanted. Adrenaline kicked, and I did the only thing I could do to survive. Escape. I darted from the asphalt into the trees. My sneakers seemed to cut off my circulation. I collided with branches but pressed on through the pain, running and zigzagging blindly. Heavy footsteps could be heard not far behind. And then I heard it. "I'll kill you." The man roared in the background, not far from me. He was traversing through the trees at a faster rate than I was. I started to gain some distance, thankfully. The man clearly wasn't in as great a shape as I was, which might have been the only thing keeping me alive through the night. I made the split-second decision to hide behind a tree, crouch low, and force my breathing to be shallow and quiet. Every nerve in my body screamed to keep running, but I didn't. I waited, frozen, heart hammering in my chest. His footsteps continued to draw closer. He was within 20 feet now. The leaves crunched nearby. "I'll find you, kid," he yelled aloud. "Don't think that I won't." There was silence after that. It was minutes of this, then minutes turned into hours. I didn't move. My legs were cramping. My teeth chattered. But I wasn't about to lose my cover to discomfort. I would wait for dawn. And like that, the pale light appeared again. I gave it another 20 minutes before I decided to head back to the road. There was my truck. This time, the door was ajar. My glove box was open. The man's truck was gone, though. I sat in my car, breathing shallowly as I tried to recover my whereabouts. That's when I saw it. On the dash was a crumpled receipt from my glove box that had been smoothed flat to write a message in a jagged handwriting style. It read, "Don't run next time, Jason." I used to think of myself as pretty independent, like I really didn't need anyone's help, and that I could handle myself. I learned that's a dangerous attitude to have on one fateful night. I was 19 at the time, and school just got out for winter break. To dodge the traffic, I typically drove late, and it was close to midnight when I left the campus. Nothing much to see on the highway, a few red taillights disappearing into the distance. Nothing much but my thoughts, and I like it that way. Just the windows cracked, the cold December air keeping me awake, and music low to set the mood. And then, about an hour in, I see that the gas light came on. I normally didn't care if the light came on because I wasn't going far, only this time I had to make it back home from school, and the needle sank faster than expected. I couldn't believe it. The engine coughed one more time, then it died. I pulled my car over to the shoulder. My headlight shone against the endless tree line in front of me. I grabbed my phone as anyone would in the situation, only I had no bars. Come on, come on. I raised my phone to the windshield. Still no bars. How about outside? It was freezing. But I reached for the sky, and still nothing. Well, I don't have a choice. I can try to walk to the nearest convenience store, but it looks like it's a mile out. I'm not risking it in this weather. Maybe I'll just turn my hazards on and fog up the cabin of the car in the meantime. Someone's got to pass soon. Lo and behold, 40 minutes before someone finally showed, the headlights were what woke me from my stupor. At first I was excited. The dark sedan pulled up right behind, its tires crunching the gravel. And then my chest knotted as the driver opened the door. It was a man, middle-aged, with thin hair and glasses. He casually waved in my direction like he was trying too hard to play it cool. He called out, "You alright?" By now he was approaching my car. I barely peeled the window down, just enough to say, "I ran out of gas." His smile told me something was off. "Sorry to hear that. Gas station's about 10 minutes from here. Hop in. I'll give you a ride." "What do I do?" "I need a ride, but not from this guy." "Well, I didn't have any signal. It's the middle of the night, and it's below freezing. Do I really have a choice?" I decided to lock my car and follow him as he guided me to his vehicle. It smelled like mildew in his car. Gross. There was a child's car seat in the back. What the? It was filthy, with the strap frayed and sticky, along with something dry. There was a stuffed bear in the back seat, lying upside down with one eye missing. "Sorry about the mess," he responded hastily. I couldn't say much. I just nodded, buckled my seatbelt, and prayed to God that he drove to where he said we were going. We pulled back onto the road as his headlights passed through the trees, providing silhouettes in the background. The man tried to engage in small talk, asking where I was from, what school I attended, and what I was majoring in. He kept asking question after question, but the silence made him uneasy. That's when I heard something I can't unhear to this day. It was a faint thump from behind us. It was the asphalt, right? A pothole. But I looked quickly and found no potholes that could have made a sound like that. The man suddenly elevated his voice when the sound went off. talking in tangents as though trying to distract me from what I just heard. And there it was again, another thump. Only this time it was louder. What was that? It sounded like a muffled cry. I could feel the knots in my stomach. I looked at him as if he would somehow reveal my suspicions. His knuckles seemed to tighten on the steering wheel, and his jaw clenched, even as he maintained a smile. It's like he was hoping I didn't notice. There it was again. It wasn't a bump. It wasn't the road. It was a voice. A high-pitched, desperate voice, screaming from the trunk. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I froze. I panicked. This man could be a psychopath, and I'm in a moving vehicle with him. I had no other option but to pretend like my suspicions weren't glaringly obvious. The man didn't seem to notice, but said in a strangely cheerful tone, "Almost there. Should be a couple minutes." I slowly moved my hand toward the seatbelt latch, using my peripherals more than anything else to watch if this man made any sudden movement. I was afraid he could hear my heartbeat by now. The vehicle began to slow down, and the road widened as we approached a small intersection, the red light stopping our progress. The car reached a halt for the first time, and I knew this may be my only opportunity. All I can thank is instincts in that moment. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what would happen next, but I yanked the buckle free, shoving the door open, and bolting into the below-freezing night. The man lunged across his seat, as if he too instinctively knew what I would do. His fingers grasped my sleeve, but I pulled away in time to escape into the night. The cold air penetrated my lungs, and I struggled to breathe, sprinting away from the dark sedan. I was stunned to see the headlights of an oncoming truck blaring its horn at me. That didn't stop me as I saw a gas station ahead. I couldn't be more ecstatic to see the neon buzzing over the windows, knowing somebody in there had a phone. I crashed through the doors and immediately shouted in the store, "Call the police." The clerk at the front froze for a moment before reaching to grab the phone. The officers arrived on the scene shortly after, but it was too late. The sedan was already gone. They took my statement, including every shaky detail I could muster amid my flustered state. They put out an alert to apprehend the vehicle matching my description. They found the sedan hours later, abandoned behind an abandoned warehouse just 2 towns over. The trunk? Empty. There were no signs that anyone had been inside. No damage of any sort. No blood. As if it never happened. One officer tried to conclude that maybe the noises were stress-induced, and that my mind assumed the bumps in the road were something worse. I really wanted to believe it. I did. I tried to shake it off as best as I could. But then a week later, I got a text. My phone buzzed in response to a message from an unknown number. All it read was, "You shouldn't have left." It was a few months into my gap year, and I was on the way to a friend's house to crash for a few days. The plan was to rest, then take the coast all the way from coast to coast. It was nearing nightfall, and I was driving down a long open road. I hadn't seen any houses or gas stations for nearly an hour when I noticed my gas was nearing empty. I was sure that I had just filled it up at the last station, only 50 miles before, but before long, my engine started to go out, and I came rolling to a stop on the side of the road. When I got out of the car, I noticed that something had been spilling under my car the entire way. It was a long line of what smelled like gas. It must have been a leak. There was no reception that far out, so I sat on my hood and waited for someone to come by. It didn't take long before a beat-up Ford truck pulled up behind me. After a moment, I realized it looked familiar. The truck had been at the same pump as me when I got out to get some water. The window rolled down, and there was an older man with a weird, leathery face. He smiled at me and asked if I needed any help. It was pretty unsettling, but I didn't have any other choice, so I thanked him and got in. His car smelled like cigarettes and moldy bread. The man said he would take me to the nearest gas station to get a gas can and bring it back to my car. He kept looking over at me the entire ride, sneaking glances at my legs, so I pretended to be asleep while keeping my eyes slightly open. The guy must have bought it, because when we got to the nearest station, he blew right past it. I started to panic a bit. I thought about confronting him, but I knew he was too big to fight. Luckily, we were coming up on a rest stop about a half a mile away. I opened my eyes and told him I had to pee. He said that he'd stop at the next place, So I crossed my legs, winced, and told him it was too late. I'd have to pull over or I'd make a mess of his car. The man frowned and sighed, but he gave in and pulled over. The second we came to a stop, I sprinted out of the car and into the woods off the side of the road. He shouted after me, but I couldn't hear him. The bushes were scratching at my legs, but I didn't stop running. The rest stop was close enough that I could see the lights. My phone had died by that point. I wiped away the tears and gasped for breath as I made it to the rest stop parking lot. The lot was completely empty, other than one nice sedan. There was light coming from inside the sedan. I figured it was a phone, so I ran and banged on the window. The guy from earlier was nowhere to be seen. I think he gave up once it got too risky for him. The phone light shut off, and the person inside rolled down the window. It was another man, but he was a lot cleaner than the last guy. When he saw the state I was in, he got out of the car and asked what was wrong. I stumbled over my words, trying to tell him about what happened, and asked him if I could use his phone to call for help. He told me I could, and that he'd get some water and a blanket from the back of the car so I could calm down. While I stood against the door and shivered, he stepped out of sight and opened the trunk. While waiting, I glanced into his car. There were a pair of binoculars on the passenger seat. I turned to where the man had disappeared and found him pulling rope out of the trunk. I stumbled into the side mirror, and he realized I'd seen him. Even though I was exhausted, I managed to use the last of my energy to sprint to the rest stop. His footsteps trailed behind until I caught the eye of the woman at the desk. The guy chased me, ran back to his car, and drove off while I watched him from inside the lobby. The woman at the lobby stayed with me while I tried to pull it together. After everything that night, I could barely even trust her. The lady gave me a free room for the night. I managed to get in touch with my friend, and she came to pick me up the next day. When we got my car towed, it turned out my fuel lines had been cut. I guess the guy who followed me from the gas station had the whole thing planned. The fact that I ran into a second psycho must have just been insanely bad luck. I canceled my gap year because of all that. The long hours of driving put a pit in my stomach that took all the fun away. I ended up going back to live with my parents that year. The whole thing made me feel a bit worse about the world. I can't believe enough people like that exist that I could run into two of them in one night.